Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Natanya Blanck, and I am so honored to introduce to you our guests for today. We have, of course, for this speaker series for the Miami Jewish Film Festival, we are thrilled to have director Poli Martínez Kaplun, who will be talking about her movie, The House on Wannsee Street. Before we begin, I want to tell you that you'll have a chance to ask us any questions after our discussion. If you have a question, what you can do is either find your raise hand. You can raise your hand in your raise hand icon on your screen and raise your hand, or you can type a message to the Miami Jewish Film Festival. What will happen is we're going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then after that, we'll start calling the questions. We will not be able to see you, but if you want to talk, we'll be able to hear you. When I say it's time for you to ask your question, you can open your microphone, ask the question, and then the director will close the microphone and you will not be able to open it again. If you're shy, you can raise your hand and type your question, and you will be able to ask questions as well. I also want to say that you can probably already see that we have not only one special guest, but two more super special guests. We have Mrs. Helen Kaplun, who is Poli's mother, whom you see in the film, and also Mr. Norbert Maassen, whom you also see in the film. So we are very honored to have all three of you to the speaker series, and let's begin. First of all, I would love to ask you, Poli, what made you pursue this project? What made you do the film, and what were your goals? What were you expecting to find?
Maybe I think I started to do the film because I wanted to know about my history, family story, and I really didn't know, even if I were a bit big, because I started the movie when I were 45 years old. I knew a very few topics about the story. Mm-hmm. And it's true, it's a true story. My son wanted to make his bar mitzvah when he was 13 years old, and for me it was an opportunity to ask me question about the history, about our Judaism. Where could I say to him that we were Jew or not? I were Jew or not? And that's why I started to ask and to film, because I am a producer and a video producer, cinema producer. Then I wanted to all my research I started to do with the camera, and that's a film. Is my research about my story.
Yes. What made your son want to do his bar mitzvah? I've been having this question since I saw the film.
I don't know. My mother said that maybe it was, I don't know what was the beginning. If my question about my story, or he wanted to make his bar mitzvah. Maybe I transfer something to him about my desire to know about the story. But I think he felt something too. He felt something about the question about his identity. He wanted to know, and he wanted to decide. He was Jewish too. And that's why he decided, even if he was very young, 13 years old, he wanted to make his decisions, his bar mitzvah, and that was the beginning for both, for him and for me, to start to know our story.
Fantastic. One of the main characteristics of your film is that you tell the story through the photographs and the films of your family. That is very striking. I think it's very unusual for families to have so many photographs from even from the 19th century. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
When I started to make the film, that's a true story too. In the film, I went to my aunt Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
She used to live in Geneva for 50 years, and then when she was retired, she came to Argentina, and she came with all the belongings of my grandparents, who used to live in Geneva, and I started to open the boxes and to find this kind of photograph and albums, and I think it's a treasure. It's a real treasure, and I am curious too because they immigrated five times, no, for 5 times. 5 veces. I don't know how this.
You're good.
And all that belongings, all that objects and photographs survived these migrations, survived the war. But yeah, it's strange. Otto Littmann, my great grandfather, used to have a camera in his house in the beginning of the century. And he was a photographer, amateur photographer, and I have lot of photographs from him, and I can see what kind of life he had in at that time. And these photographs, I think, are very important for my family because I tell that story in the film too, that helped my mother and my aunts to recover the house, because these photographs were a proof for the German government, the proof of the life in that house in Germany. And it was important to Norbert too, because he bought the house and he could make the restorations of the house, seeing the photograph.
Yeah, there's such amazing documents that they tell you part of your family's history. From then you could try to find the rest. No? And since we have Helen here, the documentary shows us that you were the sister who most wanted, in the beginning at least, to recover the house. Why? Why did you want to recover the house?
Well, the house was it was a symbol. It was a symbol that it belonged to my mother. She owned it, because you see, before we started in the 89 to recover the house, before that, the German on the side of the West sent a letter to my parents saying that they were able to get some kind of recognition that the house could belong to my mother. But to be able to get her mother out of Germany, out of Berlin, she was married to a Sephardi in Alexandria, because she couldn't get the papers. She couldn't get the papers for her to immigrate in Alexandria.
Boba is your mother, is your father, no? Boba is your father.
I beg your pardon?
Boba.
Boba is my father, Vladimir Boba.
Vladimir, right.
Volusik.
So they had to marry somebody from a Sephardic background to be able to get the papers?
No, it was Lippmann. My grandmother Lippmann, to be able to, she drove from Germany by car to the coast of the Mediterranean. She took a ship to be able to go into Egypt, but she was stopped in Cyprus. Right. In Cyprus she lived, while they got her papers. They couldn't get her papers for immigration.
Yes.
And so she got married by proxy with somebody. So the whole thing was that maybe the house in Wannsee could be received by somebody we never knew, but had married, was a descendant of this man who married my grandmother. Fortunately, nobody appeared, nobody reclaimed it. And this way, my mother got her first recognition that the house belonged to the family Lippmann.
To her, okay.
That was the first time. I think I'm speaking of the 70s, late 70s.
Well, your mother was still alive. You know, your mother
My mother was still alive. My mother passed away in 1992.
Okay.
Yes.
And then after she passed away, you continued with the work of trying to recuperate this.
When the wall came down in '89, that's where we got finally a telegram from the lawyer of my mother saying that we should start getting the papers moving, that we were able to get the house on our name. But it took more or less, and this will, Norbert will tell you more, because he was absolutely a very helpful and we had him on, he and his cousin, I must say, who lives in Buenos Aires, were very, very helpful and kind to us with the German language, and were able to get all the papers through. But it took more than 12 years, didn't it, Norbert?
Yeah, more or less.
That was my next question is, how did you find Norbert? Because, yeah, because you found the perfect person for that house, who seemed to love the house and to honor the memory of the family.
Yes, yes. In Spanish we say una aguja en un pajar.
Yeah, a needle in a haystack.
And that was Norbert for us. And well, we met his cousin coming back from Switzerland, visiting our family in Geneva. And he was coming to Buenos Aires for a contract for a few months. And we became very good friends of Norbert's cousin. And when we started all these papers with the house, Achim, Norbert's cousin, started to help me with the German, and he put me in contact with Norbert. And so we had a very intense communication, the three of us. And it was very, very tough. Sometimes very frustrating too. But we got through. We got through. I still can't believe it, how we went through with so many different, because it wasn't not only because of to get the recognition, but it was also afterwards to get the people out of the house. There were people, not anybody, the people who lived in the house, I can't remember, 5 families, Norbert?
Yeah, right.
We had to get them out. And in Germany, you can't just tell them, please go. It was very hard, very frustrating sometimes. And that was Norbert's very ability and an extraordinary help with it, because he went up to every single one of them, became friendly with them, and so they would understand the situation.
So Norbert, what does this house mean to you?
First, it was a kind of a duty, being asked by my family to take care of it. Helen explained that already a little bit. the major part of my family emigrated to Argentina a long time ago. So there's a very strong link between our families in Buenos Aires. And my job at the first time was to take care of the house as a kind of administrator, and to take care of the people living in this house, still living there under very bad conditions, and also to try to sell it. This was my duty, and this was my job for, let me say, 3 or 4 years. I tried my very best in this case. And in this time, I didn't have a real strong relation to this house. This developed step by step.
And so now, after you were able to do that, and now that you live in the house and you were able to reclaim it and go through the photographs and try to build it the way it was before, we see in Poli's film also how you have the story of the house right there in photographs and text. What's this personal journey for you? Why did you do it? How did you do it? And what does it mean to you to live in that house that's so full of history right now?
Yeah, the whole region is full of history here. We are living here in a very small village called Klein Glienicke, and this house is part of this village since more than 100 years. And it's a kind of microcosmos of German history. Many important little things happened here, also very bad things in the neighborhood. And so I got in contact with many neighbors here, and every neighbor had to tell some story. And after 3 or 4 years of trying, of my efforts to sell it, I decided, okay, it's not worth to tear it down. It was in a very bad condition, this house, but after being more in contact with all the details of history, I have a kind of feeling or hobby concerning history, and for me it's very interesting to experience history in micro format, and this house is a kind of micro format of German history. And so after the decision not to tear it down and finally to buy it my own, I started to reconstruct it, but life has changed since many years, so I cannot reconstruct the life which happened here before. So we had to adapt it to modern conditions, and during the years a very strong relation to this building developed, and with the help of the many photographs we have been able to give a certain idea how it was in the past.
How has this film affected the house? Do you have more people coming by to see it? Do you have people trying to find out more about it?
It's not yet premiere in Germany. Okay. Only it was because of the pandemic.
Okay.
It was presented at a dog festival in Munich, but not yet in Berlin. Okay. That's why maybe you don't have. It's not a famous house at the moment.
But a neighbor of here in the village is a filmmaker too, Jens Arndt, and he made a film, a kind of series of so-called secret places, and he dealt with our village, and but on the focus of with a focus on GDR life. And because this was a very special hotspot in GDR Francia regime, and but I contacted him with the idea, if you want to explain something about GDR, you also have to understand the time before, otherwise you are lost in translation somewhere. And so he developed a kind of prehistory to his GDR topic. And so Helen's family took part in the German film issued in the year 2009, more or less, which was published in German TV. And during or by this film, and also by means of the parallel exhibition and website, quite a lot of people came here around and wanted to know more about this house.
And it's a very interesting spot, very close to the wall, right? It was very close to the Berlin Wall, as you mentioned in the.
Yeah, 10 meters. We are now 10 meters to the former frontier, and it's another special issue is that we are living at the so-called narrowest spot of GDR. GDR near to our house just was 6 meters wide.
Wow. And Poli, you also mentioned that the house was very close to the other house on Wannsee Street.
Yeah, very near. That story, this situation, I knew when in one of my journey in Berlin, because I don't know that story. The conference where the conference of Wannsee was made, it's very near of the house of my great grandfather's house, or Norbert house. And that's incredible. That's why I think Norbert said it's a spot. It's a very historical spot. That area, no, Wannsee area in Germany, because it's a beautiful area beside Berlin. The city of Berlin is 30 minutes in car, and the Nazis. Norbert has the castle of the king of the old kings in Germany are there beside the house too, and the Nazis maybe were fall love and of the area, because it was at the time it was a rich area, and they wanted to make that terrible conference there in that house, in the house of the Wannsee conference. And Norbert told me, isn't it, Norbert? It was that house was belonged to a Jew family before to be a conference, no, before to be taken by the Nazis.
That's right.
So that house also belonged to a Jewish family, where the conference was.
Yeah. This house had a lot of owners in the early 20th century, and it was built by a Jewish family in early 20th century. But due to many effects also of First World War, the first family got, as far as I know, bankrupt, and then the next family went on, and so it was a kind of unstable situation. And finally, it was bought by public administration, by the state of Germany, and so at the very end, during the 30s, it was a part of a kind of training center of German police, and German police was combined with SS, and then. So that's the reason why it became this conference site of this conference of 1942, where high SS officials decided on the so-called final solution.
That something that for me was interesting too was how Jewish people were so integrated in the German story before the war. And for example, that area, Wannsee area, it was very rich and nice because it has a lake, and a lot of Jewish rich people used to live there before the war. And what was the case of my family? At what point they were integrated to economic and cultural life in Germany? because of the emancipation laws, no? And that is the sad story too. The Jewish people were completely integrated on the beginning of the century. That's why I told in the history, in the film, my grandmother didn't know a lot about his Jewish identity at that time, because they were a secular family. And after that, because of the persecution and because they must to leave Germany, and they want to do Alexandria, and during the war, to be Jew means to have a stigma of that. And because the Jewish family couldn't escape from Europe, because the countries, because I tell that in the story, in the film, because of the conference, Evian conference, the countries didn't allow to Jewish people to enter, even United States. Even the states didn't want that, didn't receive the Jews at that time during the war. Then the Jewish people were encerrados, imprisoned,
Closed. We're not in.
They were not allowed to leave. They were not allowed to leave.
They were not allowed to leave. Blocked in Europe, and that's why lots of Jewish families had to convert it, to find papers, Catholic papers or Protestant papers, to convert it and to go to the embassies and had the papers to immigrate. And that was the fact of my family. They had to convert it to Protestantism to find finally the peace and to move to Argentina. And they came to Argentina with Protestant papers, and they grew up finally in peace, without the stigma of death, without the stigma of Judaism. And I think it's a terrible story. It's a very sad story, because it's like something that the families had to silence, the identity had to silence to not to die. And that's why third generations after, we don't know nothing about the history, the recently past of our family, because it was my grandmother, and I didn't know maybe anything about the story of the sad story about my grandmother.
It's a very fascinating and very tough story to tell, and I think you do such a wonderful job of telling it in the movie.
For me, it was very important, yeah, and I am happy that people who see the movie can think about his own, their own story, because all of us, we have a family story, and people maybe see the movie and ask themselves how they know about their story, how they know about their trauma, about this kind of heritage. And I think it's important, because we all our story. We are our story. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. We are our story. It's perfectly understood.
We are our past. Yeah.
We are. I'm going to ask you a last question. The producer here is asking me to say that I'm going to ask a last question. And then meanwhile, if anybody has a question, you should either raise your hand in the screen or type a question so that we can take it afterwards. But I want to ask you, Poli, about this exact thing that you're mentioning right now. I read one of your interviews that you said that it was very important for you to reaccommodate, to come to terms, right? with your present, or with your present, to be able, by the same time, to honor your past. You know, I think I read it in Spanish. You said, reacomodar el presente al mismo tiempo dándole honor al pasado, no? To honor the past and be able to accommodate your present. How did that happen? What is that? You mentioned also that you feel close to Norbert because you're both third generation after the Shoah, after the Holocaust. So how has this affected the fourth generation? You know, how has this changed your present and maybe the future of your families?
No, I think something were hidden in my family, in a way. There was something that my family, my mother and my aunt, maybe my mother, yes, but you on the film you can see my aunt can something that could have it was very difficult to say. Maybe the family knows, but they couldn't say. I think it's maybe it's a psychology theory. You need to say the things. You need to say the suffers to find the words to say your suffer, because it's important, because it's the way that you can recover. And yeah, for me it was something that maybe I didn't suffer a lot because of that situation, but it was something that I felt it. I felt it.
The secrets were heavy.
Yeah, I felt something that I didn't knew, and now I know, and I can put in words, and I could put it in images. I could do. I did a film, and I think it's very important for my children too. And for Norbert, yeah, I think when I started to travel to Germany, I saw in Norbert and other people that they are in the same way, in the way to that's the story that happens. So was terrible, so traumatic. Then the third generation in Germany to start right now in the present, start to talk about it. No, isn't it, Robert? To talk and to realize and to make reflection, thoughts about that story, because the other generations, second generation, could talk about it. Was so traumatic.
That's true.
And that's why me, maybe like a Jew, can talk very. I am in the same process that Norbert, like a German third generation, no? Because we both live in a trauma story family.
Incredible. And that also brings me to think of a part in the film where Helen says that growing up, what embarrassed you was the stigma of being a convert. Right? That's what bothered you.
Oh yes, oh yes. And that took me especially after I started going to the university and meeting other people, thinking people. I studied psychology. I went into what was called the School of Philosophy, which had to do with my grandfather, after all. That was my choice. But I'm a psychoanalyst, and he wasn't a psychoanalyst. But that started to question what was, I am a Jew, I'm Protestant, I'm Christian. What is being a Jew? Especially, what is being a Jew? I don't know. I still am questioning when I'm confronted with people who ask me, are you a Jew? Yes, I'm a Jew. What is being a Jew? If I don't believe in religion, Because that in Christianity, you don't have that question. Are you Christian? It doesn't matter if you believe or you don't believe. What is being a Jew? I still can't make up my mind what it is to be a Jew. But I must say that when Poli told us that Nicolas was going to go to the temple and prepare for the bar mitzvah, I accompanied him to several ceremonies on Fridays. And there I was. And I can tell you that even though I didn't understand very much, I did feel something. It had to do with me. I was in Jerusalem, in Palestine, when I was 4. I remember going into the temple. It had something, it rang a bell. I can't tell you where it rang, but it was present. And my father, who was not a believer, he was, but anyway, once a year, he went to the temple. Once a year, he had to honor his family.
Well,
And
maybe
that we knew.
you always knew you were a Jewish family.
We always knew it. But being Christians, Protestant, it didn't bother my family. It didn't bother my parents. We went to church. It was fun. We met boys. We went out. We had little stories about Christianity and the new Bible. It was fun. But when I started to be older and to start thinking, but what are these stories? Do I believe in these stories? And that's when I stopped. And that's where the question of being a convert came back to me.
Yeah.
And it's a strong word.
Very.
It still is.
It still is. You still feel it.
And not by election.
No? Right, right. There's a reason why you had to convert. Poli, you wanted to say something? I see that you wanted to add something to this.
No, I think I told my mother when I made the research of the story, I thought it was me. That was incredible that I told my mother about that law, the 11 Circular 11.
Right, that law, there's a law in Argentina that's called Circular number 11. Yes.
Yeah, and I didn't know about this anything about this law, and my mother neither. And I think for you, Helen was very
touched. I was very touched when you told me that.
Because you at that moment you understood why your family made you Protestant.
Protestant, yes. It gave us a reason. That's true.
So that Circular 11 law in Argentina, was it the one that said that people who were undesired in other countries, who have been either thrown out or not desired in other countries?
No. Jews were not allowed to come into Argentina.
Exactly. And so they used
the Jews that came to Argentina were at the beginning of the century, but not afterwards, because they were not allowed because of the Jewish. Because the politics were that a lot of Germans, Nazi Germans, came into Argentina.
Correct.
And brought a lot of money with them. And that's why they passed away this legislation. No Jews. And the Jews that came into Argentina came through Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, Chile.
Through, but in the clandestine way.
Right.
Because they were not allowed to come.
To the neighboring countries. Because in Argentina, no, even though Argentina already had a big Jewish community, I understand from.
But that was at the beginning, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th.
Like the States. In the States was the same.
All countries, Mexico, United States, they all had quotas for Jews. They decided Right. And so Argentina had this law
Yeah.
that you kind of rediscovered
Yeah.
to understand the reason why your family had to convert.
Yeah.
Yes.
Incredible. We have a couple of questions that people are asking. So we have a question from Sarah Lambert. Let's see. She is, I think she's able to. She's asking. Has your family ever accepted that they are Jewish? This is
Oh,
a
yes,
question.
definitely. But my sister, my younger sister, became a believer, a Christian believer. She goes to church. Now she understands that she has a Jewish family, but she is Christian, and her children and her grandchildren are Christian.
Christian. And your other sister, your older sister from the beginning of the movie, who
She
says
doesn't interest her.
not interested.
It doesn't pull a question.
There's no. Another question here is, I think for Poli, what year did your grandmother get married? I'm not sure if it's for Poli or for Helen, but we can ask you both. What year was your grandmother married? So let's ask Helen first. What year was your grandmother married?
My grandmother, my mother.
I think let's answer both. What year was they're not specifying. It just says what year was your grandmother married. So I'm not sure. Let's answer both.
I don't know the year my grandmother married. My mother was born in 1907.
Your mother, Emily, in 38.
Okay. So your grandmother and Otto must have been married at the very beginning of the century, 1905, something like that, no?
That's right. As far as I remember, 1904.
Okay, 04.
Okay. No, well, thank you.
Thank
my
you.
mother married in Alexandria. She had to marry, she wanted to marry civil, but she couldn't get the papers, and the Germans wouldn't marry her. So she went to the temple and she got married in the Jewish temple.
Okay.
And, but this marriage was not accepted in Argentina. So when we came to Argentina around the 60s, my father and mother remarried. So, and my father had to recognize he had 3 daughters.
Oh.
And that's where we started the papers. I became Argentinian because I had no nationality until I was 18.
Is that right?
I was not, and I am in Egypt. To become an Egyptian, you had to have Jewish, it's what it's called Jewish sangis. It has to do with the relation where your family is born. And in Argentina, it's Jewish terris, which means where the land, where you're born, in the place you are born. So that's why Poli, my other daughter, not Poli, Poli is American, but my other daughter was born in Argentina. She's Argentinian.
I see. So now we know where both grandmothers were married. And then there's another question. Somebody from Mexico, they want to know when they can see the film in Mexico because they cannot access the film.
We don't know because of the pandemic, but the film, you can, I have a link, I have a distribution in the States, and in Mexico can see the link on streaming. Then I will send you the link.
Perfect. So you will send me the link and I can share it with people because we have quite a number of people from Mexico, from the Jewish community, who are listening and who would love to be able to see it. I have another question for you. So now that Helen mentioned, her different sisters, and you started talking about you have one aunt who is a practicing Catholic, the other aunt who doesn't really, doesn't mean much to her religion, and Helen who is saying that you are Jewish. how did you navigate this during the film? We see that very interesting final sequence, almost final sequence, where you have that conversation with Helen and your Aunt Irene and even her husband. And all four of you have such different opinions about things. How did you navigate that? How were you able to pull that together for the film, and what does it mean to you?
For me?
Poli.
But I start. That was a conversation. Like I say in the film, it was I think it was the first time that my mother and my aunt talk about that subject. Yeah, it was such an amazing, because they talked about the story of the family and how their mother suffered about that story. I think she must suffer a lot, my grandmother, because she left Germany when she was 27 years old. She wanted to, she had a boyfriend who he wanted to marry, and she left Germany. She left all their life, their friends, their boyfriend, everything. And she had to start a new life at 28 years old. At that time, she was an old woman at 27 years old. And yeah, in this conversation, I realized my aunt always thought, or she said, that my grandmother was a very happy person. And I think that was that talked a lot about my grandmother, Emily. She was very resilient. She was she suffered a very big trauma, and she was able to not show that trauma, to not show that suffering to their children. And she protected their children a lot. And yeah, I don't know why my aunt doesn't, maybe right now because of the film, but my Irene aunt didn't know a lot about their story, about the story of their family. She even know anything about their Judaism or their roots, no? And yeah, I think it was for all the family was very important to know the real story. And this conversation took 3 hours. It was a hard conversation. And maybe to make the movie and to short that scene, I spent, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks making the editing. And finally the conversations take 13 minutes. But that was a conversation, no? It's a true story, a true conversation. And the point of view of all the 2 sisters. And they have a very different point of view. And I think we are like a family, we are a very diverse family, ¿no? Una familia con mucha diversidad.
Yeah, very diverse family, yes.
And we respect each other. I respect her point of view, I respect her, she respects me. We are a very secular, or I don't know, diversity family. Yeah.
They're very secular and very close-knit, and you all love each other and can respect each other's point of view. That's clear in the documentary. But also the different ways in which each of the sisters carries this legacy is completely different.
Yes, that's true. I wanted to say something else. Even though Nicolas was the one who opened Poli's, the film of Poli.
Right, Nicholas is your son, no? Who had his bar mitzvah.
Yes.
Yes, but Poli started filming, and she went to live in Paris when she was 19 years old. Mm-hmm. And she already had the idea that she wanted to make a story of the family. I think you started already with your grandfather and your grandmother speaking to them, because in Paris you went often to Geneva, and you had a camera, not a video camera, you had a tape camera, a tape recorder, and you wanted to make their life history since you were 20 years old. So you started with these questions, and the curious thing is, it's at the same age I started questioning myself, what is being a Jew, what is being a Christian? And I think some of these questions started to move in your head, Poli.
What do you think, Poli?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think it's something that I have for a while, no? For
a long time.
Years. Yeah, for a long time. And I'm very happy to do this, finally, the film. It was hard, but yeah, we know the story, the story, and I think it's like you say, it's a story of the Judaism. What is the Judaism? What is the definition of the Judaism? But it's a story of a trauma of the family, una familia traumatizada,
and of the 20th century.
Sorry.
Definitely.
Of the 20th century. It's a history of the 20th century.
Yeah, but it's a history that it has the particularity of make the focus in a family who suffered this trauma. Absolutely. And how this trauma was lived by the members of the family. Mm-hmm. Talk about that too. And there are a lot of families. I realized when I made the film, or when people came to see the film, that there are a lot of stories like mine. Mm-hmm. A lot of stories of immigrations because of war, or because of genocide, or because of, and how people make with that trauma, no?
Mm-hmm. Right. I was especially struck by your oldest aunt, Catherine, no? From the beginning of the film, where she says, I don't want to see these albums, I don't care, these are people I never met, these are people from the past. She even says, if you bring me photos from your children, I will admire them. But people from the past, I don't care, I don't want to talk about the past. Yet it's very clear that she is the one who carries that story on her shoulders, right? She has the albums. She has that painting of the great-grandfather with the kippah on the wall. Mm. So it's there, but yeah, it's part of the.
She gave the legacy. It's her that he gave me the legacy. It's incredible, but she didn't realize that. She don't want to talk about, and it's a nation. It's a nation. It's one of the way to live through the trauma, the nation, the silence.
The silence. To keep the silence. Very interesting. We have one more question from somebody in the audience, somebody from Israel, actually, who is watching from Israel. He says, excellent that Poli mentioned the Evian conference and the Circular 11 of July 1938. Will the film be accessible also in Israel?
Yeah, with this link.
Ah, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. And we can get it to them. There's another question here. It says, was your idea to connect this new generation with the past Jewish history that is far away from them, or only to follow your roots? I think it says, was your idea, did you want to connect the new generation of Jewish and non-Jewish people with story that's far away from the past, or was it only a personal history to follow your roots?
On the beginning, it was a personal story, but I think personal story are universal story. When you talk about you and your family, you are talking about all the families in the world, and yeah, that's literature and cinema, no? When you talk about a very personal and small story, but it's very, very big. And the most personal story is more big you can be.
So the more personal the story is, the bigger you can.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
That's true. Anything else before we wrap up? Is there anything else that any of you want to say? It's been such a pleasure and an honor to have you all here. It really is thrilling to be able to see you. So if anybody,
maybe Norbert, you can say what do you felt when you saw the film, but you were maybe Norbert helped me a lot to make the film, because I went to Berlin to his house 3 times, and he was really helpful for me. He showed me all the life of Germany, the Wannsee, the house. He knew the story more than me, and he was my friend. He made the film with me, and finally he had the film that I think it's interesting to know what was his how did he saw finally the product, no, the film.
It was a very emotional moment for me to see the final outcome of all these efforts during the last, let me say, 15 years. Sorry for being a kind of expert of your family, but many documents have been written in German, so I try to translate them, and there have been written some theses. You remember from Poli Brandt here in Potsdam, who wrote a lot of things, a lot of interesting stories about your grandfather, and but all these documents were in German. So it was really an emotional thing. Another very emotional moment was in 2007 when Helen and her sisters showed up the very first time here. Or no, better to say, they spent the first night in the house since 70 years. So they had to leave in 37, and 70 years later they were back, and that was also quite emotional for me. Finally, what I can offer, yeah, sorry.
And for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have sunset now here, and you see in the background, you see part of the house. What I can do, with the risk that the connection is lost, that I walk around the garden. You can see the house from behind, or get some impression of the situation here, of yeah, how to say, that I could do.
Everybody would love that. Please do that.
Okay, especially for those participants who unfortunately were not able to access the film, I make it like this to start with a kind of guided tour. I try it, but if I'm lost in translation somewhere, then my internet connection is gone. So sorry.
If you are lost, we really want to thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. Mm-hmm.
Let's see a little bit of the house.
But audio connection is still there.
Okay.
Yes. So this is the garden.
Beautiful.
The light is quite low now. Mm.
We were always in winter, so I never saw it green.
Okay, sorry. This is a good opportunity to see it in green.
Yes.
And this is the lake.
Norbert, then some of the trees were planted by my grandfather, if I remember well, no?
I think we'll, yeah.
Norbert?
Norbert, can you hear us?
No.
I think we lost the connection.
There's a note,
summer.
I think, that my grandfather planted,
Some of
and
the,
he still kept it.
that's
Yeah,
another.
The house from behind.
From behind, yeah. Mhm. And what else could I show? This is the forest here. This is between west.
We can't hear him.
Line.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're losing your connection, Norbert.
um,
Yeah, we're losing the connection, but it's been very, very special to see.
Yeah, the neighborhood is
easy
amazing.
to see now. Mhm.
To see a little bit of the
Yeah.
house.
I going back to interconnect.
Okay.
Very
You have
nice.
to go back in the summer to Helen and Polly.
Yes, I
Yeah.
have to go back.
Here it's so
Hopefully.
To it.
I hope so. There's another thing. I don't know if you mentioned it. You know that there is a very huge palace, which was the palace you have. I can't remember right now. There are two big palaces
Sanssouci.
in Potsdam.
Sanssouci.
Sanssouci.
The biggest
a
one is
beautiful
Sanssouci, quite here. Mhm.
And there's another one. And I remember you were telling me that there was very near your house, there was a place where the Nazis met to know where the Jews lived in the area. Is that correct?
Yeah, the very crazy situation is that here in direct neighborhood your grandparents had a neighbor called General von Schleicher. Von Schleicher was the last chancellor before Hitler, and he was murdered in '34 at a campaign, a Nazi campaign to kill all how to say. No, my English is lost. Sorry. It was, in Deutsch, it's called Röhm-Putsch. It's a special event in summer '34, and during this campaign, also this General Schleicher was killed at his house here, right in front of us. And afterwards, there was installed an office of German administration, Nazi administration, which was called Rassenpolitisches Amt. Rassenpolitisches Amt means it was a kind of scientific institute, a pseudo-scientific institute, trying to find out the differences between Jews and Aryan population. And the results of these efforts ended up into the so-called Nuremberg laws, Nürnberger Gesetze. And this is part of the exhibition in the other Wannsee house. This is the connection between here and there. Mm-hmm.
Someone wants to know, I have a question here. They want to know if you live by yourself in that big house. You have to answer.
Yes, we have the luck to live in this house as well. We are 3 families. We live in the middle part, and we have two more families here. It was a house built for a single family, Helen's family in former times, Otto's family, but now times have changed. So our economic means are a bit more limited, let me say it like this. So we subdivided it into 3 apartments.
Well, fantastic. So Poli, your family's house is at the center of history. And that's what you've been able to
because it's a symbol. It's a story of a century, no? That area, that for my family, for like I said before, for the entire world, Wannsee.
Yes. and it becomes a universal story. So I want to thank you for the Miami Jewish Film Festival, really for being here, for gifting us this time to talk about your fantastic film, and hopefully we'll see you soon at some point. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
So to you, thank you.
From everywhere.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being with you.
A pleasure.
Thank you. Likewise.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Norbert. Bis bald.